Most people who struggle with Antidetect browsers do not have a browser problem, they have a proxy problem. They spend hours perfecting a fingerprint and then bolt on whatever proxy was cheapest, and the two never agree. The browser tells one story about the device and the proxy tells a completely different story about the network, and that contradiction is what gets an account flagged. Today I want to walk through setting proxies up inside an Antidetect browser the right way so the network story and the device story actually match. Quick to note on framing. I run real proxy and cloud phone farms, and this pairing is where I spend most of my testing time, more than the browser feature list. I'm going to keep this practical and defensive, how to make a setup internally consistent, not a recipe for beating any specific platform. And no undetectable promises, because consistency reduces one class of problem. It does not make anything invincible. Why the proxy is half the identity. Start with the core idea. A platform reads two stories about every visitor, a device story from the browser and the network story from the connections. The fingerprint is only the device half. The proxy is the network half, and it carries its own geography, its own reputation, and its own type. A flawless fingerprint sitting on a contradictory proxy is often a bigger red flag than an average setup where both halves agree. So the proxy is not an accessory to the browser, it is the other half of the same identity, and it deserves equal care. One proxy per profile. Always, the first rule is simple, and people break it constantly. Each profile gets its own dedicated proxy, and you do not share one proxy across many profiles. The whole point of separate profiles is that they do not link, and funneling them all through one exit address relinks them at the network layer, no matter how distinct their fingerprints are. If a dozen carefully separated profiles all exit from the same IP, that address becomes the thread tying them back together. One profile, one proxy, kept consistent, is the baseline everything else builds on. Know your proxy types. Before you attach anything, understand what you are attaching. Data center proxies come from server hosting ranges and carry the least default trust because ordinary people do not browse from server racks. Residential proxies route through real home connections and read as ordinary households. Mobile proxies route through carrier networks where many real users share addresses, so they carry a lot of default trust. ISP proxies sit in between, hosted but registered to consumer providers. The type you choose has to match the kind of device your fingerprint claims to be, and that matching is the whole game. Match the proxy type to the fingerprint. Here is the pairing that matters most. If your fingerprint looks like a mobile device, the proxy underneath it should be a mobile proxy, because a phone fingerprint exiting from a data center is an obvious contradiction. If your fingerprint looks like a desktop in a home, a residential proxy fits. The failure mode is a mismatch, a residential-looking fingerprint on a data center address, or a desktop fingerprint on a mobile carrier IP. The device type the browser claims and the network type the proxy provides have to tell the same story, or the pairing reads as inconsistent. Geography has to agree. The fastest mismatch anyone can catch is geography, and it needs no fancy detection to spot. Your browser reports a time zones, a locale, and a language. Your proxy exits from an IP registered to a specific country and city. If the browser says one country and the proxy exits another, that is visible immediately, because comparing the two is nearly free to do. So set the profile's time zones and locale to match the proxy's actual exit location, and many Antidetect browsers can do this automatically from the proxy. Always confirm it rather than assume it. HTTP versus SOCKS and authentications. On the mechanics, you will usually attach a proxy as either an HTTP or a SOCKS connection, and SOCKS generally handles more traffic types cleanly, so prefer it when your provider offers it. Authentication comes in two shapes: a username and password pair, or IP whitelisting, where the provider allows your own address through, paste the host port and credentials into the profile's proxy field, or use the rotation link the provider gives you. Small thing, but get the protocol and auth right first, because a half-connected proxy fails in confusing ways that look like fingerprint problems. Sticky sessions versus rotation. Think carefully about whether the address should hold or rotate. A sticky session keeps the same exit IP for the length of your work, which is what a real user's connection does, holding one address for a session or longer. A rotating proxy changes the address periodically or per request. For anything tied to a logged-in account, you almost always want sticky, because an address that jumps around mid-session breaks the continuity a genuine connection has, and that break is its own tell. Save rotation for tasks where continuity does not matter. Test the proxy before you trust it. This is the step people skip and regret. Before you attach a proxy to anything that matters, run the proxy itself through a public IP reputation and geolocation lookup separately from the browser. That tells you the address's registered location, its owning organization and SNs, and whether it is flagged as hosting, residential, mobile, or a known proxy. Testing only the browser's fingerprint covers half the audit. The other half is checking what the proxy admits about itself, and doing that before you create an account on top of it, not after it gets flagged. Lock down WebTel. WebTel deserves its own step because it can bypass the proxy entirely. It is a feature for voice and video that, left unmanaged, can reveal your real local and public IP underneath whatever proxy you set. The right handling is to make WebCheck report the proxy's public address, so it agrees with the exit IP, rather than leaking around it. Disabling WebCheck completely works, but is slightly unusual, since few ordinary users turn it off. Either way, verify it on a public WebCheck leak test, because an unmanaged WebCheck setting quietly undoes the entire proxy configurations. Watch for DNS leaks. A subtler leak is DNS. If your browser resolves domain names through a resolver that does not match your proxy's location, that lookup path can reveal a different geography than your exit IP. A good setup routes DNS through the proxy so the resolution story matches the connection story. Run a public DNS leak test after you attach the proxy and confirm the resolver location lines up with the exit country. It's a small check that catches a mismatch most people never think to look for. Verify the whole story together. Once everything is attached, do one combined check rather than trusting each piece alone. Open the profile, confirm the fingerprint is stable and consistent on a public checker, confirm the proxy's geography matches the profile's time zone and locale, confirm WebTel reposts the proxy address, and confirm DNS does not leak. You are checking that the device story and the network story agree at every point they can be compared. That combined verification is the actual skill, and it takes a few minutes once you have the habit. Common mistakes to avoid. The recurring mistakes are worth naming so you can skip them. Sharing one proxy across profiles. Attaching a data center proxy under a residential fingerprint. Leaving the time zone on the machine's real setting instead of the proxy's location. Ignoring RAID-C. Reusing a proxy that already has a bad reputation from someone else's abuse. Rotating an address on an account that needs continuity. Every one of these creates a contradiction between the two stories, and every one is avoidable with a check that takes a minute. Building a repeatable checklist. The way to make this stick is to turn it into a short routine you run for every profile, not something you improvise. Attach the dedicated proxy, set time zone and locale from the exit location, log WebTel to the proxy address, confirm no DNS leak, run the fingerprint checker, and run the proxy reputation lookup. Same 6 steps, every profile, every time. Once it is a checklist, you stop forgetting the step that would have flagged the account and the setup becomes boringly consistent, which is exactly what you want it to be. Reputation is inherited, not earned. Here is a hard truth about proxies that catches people off guard. An IP address carries a reputation built by everyone who used it before you, and you inherit all of it the moment you route through it. If a residential address was hammered by someone else's abuse last week, that history is attached to the address, not to you, and your careful profile walks straight into it. This is why cheap, heavily reused proxy pools disappoint. The addresses arrive already tainted. You cannot scrub a proxy's past. You can only choose addresses with cleaner histories, which is part of what you pay a real provider for. Avoid free and public proxies. The temptation to save money with free or public proxy lists is a trap worth naming directly. Free proxies are used by huge numbers of people at once, so their addresses are saturated with abuse and often already flagged as proxies outright. Worse, you have no idea who runs them or what they do with the traffic passing through. For anything tied to an account you care about, a free proxy is not a saving, It is a liability wearing a price tag of 0. The cost of a flagged account is far higher than the cost of a proper proxy every time. How many accounts per proxy? A common question is how many accounts one proxy can safely carry, and the honest answer is that it depends on the proxy type. A mobile address, shared by many real users behind carrier network address translation, tolerates more accounts before the pattern looks odd. A residential address maps to one household, so piling many unrelated accounts onto it looks less natural faster. The safe default for anything sensitive is one account per proxy, and you only stretch that when the proxy type genuinely supports it. When in doubt, fewer accounts per address, not more. Keep a record of what goes where. As your profile count grows, memory stops being enough, and an untracked setup becomes its own risk. Keep a simple record of which proxy is attached to which profile, when it was assigned, and its exit locations. This stops you from accidentally reusing an address across profiles that must stay separate, and it lets you spot when a provider quietly reshuffled a pool and handed you a different address than before. The record does not need to be fancy, a plain sheet is enough, but the discipline of keeping it prevents the silent cross-linking that untidy setups drift into. Rotation links and how they behave. If your provider gives you a rotation link rather than a fixed address, understand what it actually does before you rely on it. Some links rotate the exit IP on every request, some on a timer, and some hold sticky for a set window before changing. For account work, you want the sticky behavior, so confirm which mode the link uses rather than assuming. A rotation link quietly cycling addresses under a logged-in session recreates the exact session churn problem that breaks continuity. So know the behavior of the link you paste in, not just that it connects. So the right way to set up proxies is to treat the proxy as the equal half of the identity. Match its type and geography to the fingerprint, keep one dedicated address per profile, lock down WebT and DNS, and verify the whole story together before you trust it. Do that and you remove the single most common reason accounts get flagged. Which browsers make this pairing easy and which ones leave gaps is written up, tested hands-on with the proxies attached at antidetectreview.org with no undetectable promises anywhere. If this made the proxy site click, subscribe because next up I am comparing multilogin, gologin and Camelio and where your money actually goes with each. See you in the next one.